I return to China each time, I return home because I was born there in 1941. My parents were missionaries in Tibet, but my mom had to come out to the first border city, which was Lanzhou, and that's where she practiced her nursing those last 3 months there at the hospital, so she would be there when it was time for me to deliver. Came a little early, and I was 1 pound and 3 ounces, and God took care of me. My dad is a big man, 6'3", and he could take me in his hand, and he said, your head was at my fingers and your feet just hung into my wrist. And that's the way that they took me back up into Tibet, 14,000 feet, and inside the sleeve is where I would ride because it was all on horseback. And that's how my life began. My folks were there until I was age 8, and at that point, all women and children of Americans, October 1, 49, had to leave the country. And so I'll kind of jump forward. Paul and I went into the city of Lanzhou, and Lanzhou was where I was born. And I was so excited. So we thought, well, let's go see if we can find the hospital. I talked to my dad and asked him what the hospital. He said, oh, it's across the river. So we found this old Muslim man that had this long beard, and he said, was there a hospital in early 40s? And he said, oh yes, up there on the hill, it's the Gospel Hospital. And it was a Methodist hospital at that point, but he knew it as the Gospel Hospital. So we went over to the Gospel Hospital, and I told them that I was born there. And so they took me to the room, what was then the nursery. So we went in and talked to this nurse, and she was a believer. And so I told her that I was born there and that my father was a pastor. Do you know anybody that worked in that hospital or any pastors from that time? And she said, she got very, very uncomfortable. And she said, those were very hard days. And we said, yes, they were. That's why we'd like to know what all has been going on in your city. And she said, you might want to find this man. So she gave us an address and another man. Now it's 10:30 at night, and we knocked, and it took a while, but a very old man came to the door, and we told him our mission, that I was looking for anybody that knew anything about the 1940s. He said, oh, come in. And he took us into his room, and he'd start telling us about all the believers that had been around that area and how God had so miraculously used the missionaries at a point, but after the missionary left, God had done so much more. And we heard about all the churches that were there in the city. He said, there's 50 of them here. This past year, we have had at Christmas time, we took all of the people down to the river. He said we had to do it in the countryside so people couldn't see us. But I kept telling him to come out there, and I baptized over 400 in the Yangtze River. And this was winter, and it was cold, but he said, they won't know that we're out there because they won't come out in the cold. And all around the room was verses on the walls that they had painted because people had not been able to have Bibles. And so they had painted scriptures on the wall. Well, we started wandering around and looking at the church and wondering why we're waiting. And just about the time we thought, maybe he's left. And he comes scurrying in with his wife, his daughter, and his granddaughter. And he'd gotten them up, and they got all dressed. And he said, I must have a picture of you with these women because you are all Lanzhou women. And so he took a picture of us in front of the church, and it was just such a thrilling time to realize what God had done. And he says, and all of you love the Lord. And it was just such a special drop into my life that God had brought so many things full circle. And I had a picture of my dad from when he was in China, and I showed it to him. And he said, oh yes, I remember him. And it was just a thrill to go back and tell Dad that I had been able to go back where he'd been able to preach so many times. My dad never got to go back to China, but his heart was always there. So Dad would always say he was so excited that he was going to be get to heaven and see all the Chinese that he was able to lead to the Lord. And last month, we took his ashes and we took him back to the Great Wall. And we had a memorial service on the Great Wall with our kids that are there. And it was just a wonderful time to spread the ashes out over as the wind was blowing, because that's where his heart had always been. God has been faithful, and he has used the small group to multiply throughout the area, and hundreds know Christ as their personal Savior. Now, I did find my house. It's been torn down, and but Paul climbed back into the area, and we found the foundation of the house and the church, and I brought home with me a block out of the wall because I wanted to always remember how faithful God was. And what a thrill it is to see God use your life and to continue to build into them. And I want you to know that he is faithful. He has never let us down in all of these years, and he's not going to start now.